Good morning. It's December 8th, 2022. It's 10:38 a.m. Central Standard Time. I am going to begin a review of an audit report by the Comptroller General of the United States, dated for December 29th, 1982, understanding that this is today, 21 days before the 40th anniversary of this specific report. I contend that due to recent events, it is important that this be done today. I had originally identified a specific timeline. Things have happened in the meantime. I believe that this takes priority, and I will begin the review of it today. It is regarding DOD use of official representation funds to entertain foreign dignitaries. I will also say that I have with me at the moment a copy of Barron's Law Dictionary, which is my personal copy, and then at the facility I'm at, which is a public facility, there's also Black's Law Dictionary, 10th edition, Brian A. Garner, Editor-in-Chief. It is published in the year of publication is reported as 2009 and 2014. First concern, second paragraph, the first page, which would be the cover page. It says, quote, if Congress believes that the degree of discretion currently permitted should be modified, legislative changes would be necessary to limit the Department of Defense's use of funds for official representation activities. I'm going to need research in order to understand, since December of 1982, what legislative changes have been implemented up until now. First thing to notice in the letter to Honorable Frank Horton that is provided by the Comptroller General of the United States, Charles A. Boucher, is a citation of a March 8th, 1982 U.S. News and World Report article, When Foreign VIPs Junket at U.S. Expense. That would be March 8th, 1982. March 8th of 2022 would have been 40 years. March 7th of 2021 would have been 1 day short of 19 years. Second paragraph question, when it says visits to the United States, do they mean the continental United States? It also says demonstrations of military equipment while visiting U.S. military installations, and in a few cases, foreign guests visited military contractors' plants. Are these military contractors' plants only located within the United States, continental United States? And is there any consideration of an embassy or American property, including that which would be identified as the United States, located outside the continental United States? Third paragraph in the letter says, if I'm correct, in either 2018 or 2019, there was an audit of the Department of Homeland Security regarding a expedited program concerning Customs and Border Patrol regarding international airports. I am going to have to cross-reference the information in the third paragraph with my notes from that DHS audit, and the implications regarding border security and the specific concerns that were brought up in that report. Understand that report, even though it was released to the public, does include redacted information. First full sentence of fourth paragraph brings into consideration a matter pertaining to events that occurred in relation to the 2016 presidential campaign season in the year 2015, when a presidential candidate had visited a military facility wherein military vessels were being demonstrated. I have brought this up since I first was exposed to it in August of 2016. Understanding being these were vessels that had been laid down sometime before, naval vessels. And originally they were supposed to have 3 interchangeable operationalities that were capable of being engaged at any given time. However, there had been a decision late in the outlay process to separate it and create 3 different lines of the same vessel, each with a different functionality. According to the article that was actually in a military publication, Reasons for this were because of alleged staff training problems. I've contended that that was an inaccurate assessment, but I've also contended that there were matters of concern regarding the fact that a presidential candidate was at this demonstration and had also spoken in a manner during the campaign that appeared as if he was bidding. And when he said, "I'll take 3," would that have been considered something that may or may not have been addressed in connection with the concept of, quote, official representation, end quote? Are candidates for office in any way, shape, or form connected to whatever is identified as a, quote, official representation account, end quote, when it comes to funds, including funds regarding the entertainment of foreign dignitaries? Now, here in the same paragraph is stated a concern that the official representation accounts cannot be charged if there is another appropriation available to have that expense charged. What would be the other appropriations that would also potentially qualify under the official representation account structure? Does it make a distinction in terms of whether or not these dignitaries are, quote, foreign, end quote, or insofar as it may be assessed under the concepts of, quote, research and development cost, end quote, which may have a different sequence in the overall outlay process? Okay, what would be the 5th paragraph in the letter? It discusses, quote, a memorandum account, end quote, that could be a means by which to account for the full cost of the, quote, distinguished visitors program, end quote. However, it starts this paragraph off by saying that if there is another appropriation available, what is the priority in consideration of the charging of expenses to appropriations? Where in that priority, or what could otherwise be considered a hierarchy, does the Distinguished Visitors Program qualify? And in what manner is it either accepted out of or made a priority to other appropriations, including and especially starting with appropriations that would be identified as domestic as opposed to foreign? 6th paragraph, it discusses the wide, quote, wide discretion of the Secretary of Defense and the Secretaries of the military departments, end quote. Is there a change that has been engaged since 1982 regarding the priority or the hierarchical, including in terms of command authority relationship of the respective secretaries of the military departments? A. B, it talks about emergency appropriations. What kind of emergency appropriations? Are we talking about ones that are capped at a certain amount and can be authorized within 48 hours? Or are we talking about ones that can take a longer period of time, including ones that would need congressional approval, or both? C, it says, quote, any purpose he determines to be proper, end quote. What is the legal definition of, quote, proper, end quote? What is the statutory citation or the statutory authority or the consideration of evaluation for that which is understood as, quote, proper, end quote, including and especially in relationship to military appropriations or appropriations connected to or through the DoD? That would also include any sort of joint appropriations or joint task forces, up to and including the Department of Justice or up to and including the Department of State. 7th paragraph, second, I guess you could call it either a pullout or a bullet point, right? Which would you call it? Pullout or a bullet point? Second, proper ratios of DoD to non-DoD guests were not maintained. Were those other guests or were guests associated with the computation of the ratio from other departments, including the Department of State or the Department of Treasury? 8th paragraph, it discusses how Army and Navy officials discuss the expense limitations, but also say, quote, the limits are not adequate in all locations, end quote. I referred to the earlier question about the specific designation of, quote, visits to the United States and what constitutes, quote, the United States. Okay. The 9th paragraph, it discusses some types of expenses are allowed to be for what are called conferences, quote, conferences, end quote, conferences. However, quote, the military departments make an exception for conferences between U.S. and foreign officials, end quote. Are those only conferences that occur within the continental United States, or would those be conferences where American officials would be in another country but would be identified as being a representative of a military department. In that same paragraph, Belcher identifies, quote, also the lack of clarity about which expenses should be charged to other appropriations led to differences in how expenses, were handled by the military departments, end quote. He uses an example of 3 different examples of these lack of clarity in terms of to what else they would be potentially appropriated. That also needs to be taken into consideration in regards to the Department of Transportation or Customs and Border Patrol. Okay, second full paragraph from the top of page 3, talking about time frames. Is this a per diem, or are we talking about on an hourly basis? And what kind of accounting for time is there in terms of the authorization of the clearance of any transactions that would be occurring during this time frame? Second full paragraph, it says, quote, officials in all 3 departments are unaware of how their counterparts in other departments administer their Distinguished Visitors Program, and so far as it's identifying them as military departments. Does that mean that this is at a time frame and under a context wherein the United States Marine Corps would be under the authority of the Department of Navy? Okay, so in the third full paragraph on page 3, Belcher has 3 recommendations. On behalf of the Comptroller General has 3 recommendations that have 1, official representation funds should be used for expenses resulting from conferences between U.S. and foreign officials. 2, which expenses should be charged to other appropriations. And 3, if funds from the official representation account should be used to entertain foreign guests on weekends prior to or following the visitor's official business, end quote. And this is important. Prior to or following the official's the visitor's official business. Does this also have some sort of cross-referencing or correlation with the country of concern regarding who is identified as a foreign visitor? So if you are talking about a foreign visitor, including one that would have been officially authorized by a foreign country, is there comparable or accounting processes in works in regards to the computation of the time that dignitary is officially representing that country? Second of all, in regards to this, one of the things he says earlier is that sometimes it didn't from Sunday to Tuesday, or from Sunday to Tuesday. Many military installations at that time had Mondays off. Monday was considered a day where certain sorts of areas of military operations were closed on Mondays. There's a specific reason for that. What is the specific policy regarding the role of military business operations on Mondays, and how do they factor into this consideration? Okay, Belcher finishes this letter by saying, quote, as arranged with your office, unless you publicly announce its contents earlier, we plan no further distribution of this report except to Representative Chalmers P. Wiley until 10 days from the date of this report. At that time, we will send copies to the Secretary of Defense and the Secretaries of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, as well as other interested parties, end quote. So this is being sent with a notification of a willingness to hold off on any distribution to the departments of concern for 10 days while it is being reviewed by the Committee on Government Operations. I am going to stop this video here, and I am going to go ahead and consider the table of contents without recording it, and then determine whether or not to follow through today or whether or not to wait to further review this. My name is Colleen Crouse. It is before 11 a.m. on December 8th, 2022.